the Raising the Bar podcast, brought to you by the Association of Gray's Inn Students.
Hello, and welcome to the Raising the Bar podcast. I'm Alana Johnson, and today we're lucky to be joined by Markus Findlay and Oliver Haswell, who'll be talking to us about the route to pupillage from the perspective of both an applicant and a mentor. Markus has recently secured pupillage in criminal law at 15 New Bridge Street, and in the meantime is a caseworker at Advocate, which is formerly the Bar Pro Bono unit. Oliver Haswell is a criminal barrister at Drystone Chambers and has been Markus's mentor during the pupillage application process. Thank you both of you for joining.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Markus, congratulations on obtaining pupillage.
Thank you so much.
That's really, really impressive. You must be very happy.
Yeah, it's just about sunk in now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, still delighted, obviously.
Could you please tell us a little bit about your route to the bar?
Yes, absolutely. I guess it all started with my first experience of the law, really, and that was on school's work experience when I was 15 years old with a high street criminal law firm in Crewe, which is where I'm from. And that was an opportunity for me to see law in action in the local magistrates court and also the Crown Court in Chester, where I spent about 5 days with the CPS as well. And I knew from that moment that criminal law in particular was something that I wanted to do. It just seemed very glamorous, very exciting and very important. But I actually didn't study law initially. I studied French and German, first of all, down in London at UCL, but still wanted to go and do law eventually once that I found out that you could do a law conversion. But in the meantime, I wanted to do things that would assist me later in my legal career. So, for example, on my year abroad, I spent half a year or so in Paris, where I worked at a human rights organisation, and that really affirmed to me that law was something that I wanted to do, and I wanted to work in areas of law which involved people, which of course criminal law is one. But I still didn't make the jump to the legal conversion course. After that, my first degree, I went actually to Vienna, where I did a postgraduate degree in international relations, and then finally came back to London, where I started the GDL, then did the BPTC with a combined LLM at City Law School, and was called at Gray's Inn in 2018. And since finishing the BPTC, I've been working at Advocate, the bar's pro bono charity, where as a caseworker, where I've been for the last 2.5 years. So that's in a nutshell my route to the bar after having been recently offered pupillage.
It's interesting to hear about how you gained all this legal experience when you weren't doing a law degree, because I know a real problem that a lot of people who aren't doing a law degree face is how to get that legal experience. So law students will often have mooting opportunities and things like that. How did you find the legal opportunities which you took, which then helped you to obtain pupillage?
Yeah, so I was, like I said, I knew from quite early on that was something that I wanted to do, and was quite proactive from even during my undergraduate degree in a non-law subject. So I had already done the kind of work experience with the high street law firm in Crewe and the CPS, as I mentioned. That helped me, I guess, get my first mini pupillages, which I did before law school. Of course, not having done any legal education at the time, it was all a bit confusing, but it was exciting, and it affirmed that I wanted to do that. I was also involved with the Law Society at university, or what was called the Law for All Society. We weren't actually at that time allowed to join the University Law Society as non-law students, and that was another good way of getting some experience and actually realising that I wasn't really interested in becoming a solicitor at a corporate firm, as many of my peers were. And that actually involved a trip to Gray's Inn as well during that period. We did a guided tour, and I suppose that was useful in just really understanding what it meant to be a barrister. But there were lots of rejections from applications to chambers or law firms for work experience. It is a difficult area to get into, as I'm sure we will discuss further later on. But that was what I did, and I suppose I just did related work in the non-profit sector, which I think is incredibly useful. You gain a lot of experience above your pay grade quite early on. That was transferable experience, but I did a lot of other things as well, including making coffee, cocktails, pulling pints, that kind of thing as well, which I think actually is also a useful experience too.
As you said, a difficult profession to get into, but with all the different skills that you've gained, you've shown the benefit of resilience and thinking outside the box, really. Oliver, you were Marcus's mentor. How did you become Marcus's mentor, and what did that involve?
Well, that's a long story. I was lucky enough, probably about 2.5 or so years ago, to be asked by Gray's Inn to train as a trainer. So part of the Inn's function is to assist with people before qualification and, in fact, in their early years of practice in terms of honing their advocacy skills and their ethics knowledge. I'd been in practice for probably about 10 or 12 years, and I've had a close relationship with Gray's throughout, who have supported me in many different ways. And I was delighted when I was approached and asked if I'd like to become an advocacy trainer. That process, I didn't realise at the time, involved a week-long training course where they really put us through the mill in order to teach us the very unique techniques that are required to teach advocacy. And Markus happened to be one of the volunteers who effectively had come along to play the guinea pig while we tested our skills as trainers. And over the course of the weekend, he and I spoke on a number of occasions when we were having breaks, and he demonstrated to me fairly quickly that he had a real interest in criminal law. He was a personable and interesting chap, which is always helpful, and just asked if he would be able to touch base with me in the future if the point arose where I might be of assistance to him. And I said, of course, absolutely no problem at all. And from there started the relationship in terms of helping him along his route to securing pupillage in the last few weeks, which I must say I'm absolutely delighted. Markus has worked so hard. I don't want to blow too many trumpets, but he has really demonstrated commitment, and he's worked tirelessly to increase his performance in interviews, and it's now evident from his offer for a good set of chambers that he's met the mark, and I'm really pleased for him.
It's really lovely to hear that. I think it also really confirms the impression that I've got of Gray's Inn and of the members of Gray's Inn, where you can just ask anybody for assistance or for advice, and people are so willing to help just out of pure generosity. Yep. And so it's really lovely to hear that that is the case here as well.
Well, that's the way the bar works. I mean, I was called in 2006, and every day is a school day for me, if you pardon the pun. I go to court, I do my best to prosecute and defend, depending on what my particular brief is at that point in time. But I know that I'm surrounded by colleagues who have more experience than I do, or other ways of approaching problems. And the bar's collegiate attitude allows anyone and everyone to tap into that enormous knowledge bank. And it seems appropriate that we share it amongst ourselves in terms of those who are qualified, but equally we help those who aspire to do what we do on a daily basis. And Gray's really does embody that. It's a remarkably informal, friendly inn to be a member of, but it really looks after the people who join. And part and parcel of me being a mentor and continuing to support the inn in any way I can is effectively just paying back the enormous help that they've provided me over the years. And that's how I see this profession continuing into the future. It's how it's existed for many centuries. It's about being one and helping everyone to be the best that they can.
That real collegiate atmosphere is definitely something that's an attraction of the bar.
Yeah.
Markus, Oliver's spoken about your interview technique. What did you learn from your pupillage application process, which you think others could benefit from?
Well, that's actually a very big question, and there's a lot of material out there on this subject already, which I studied as well. And I would probably just start answering that question by just mentioning some of the resources that I use to prepare for interviews. There is actually another podcast called the Pupillage podcast, which many will know, run by some barristers at 5 Essex Court, and that they cover a whole range of subjects on pupillage application process, and that was incredibly valuable. I think, other than that, it's incredibly important to really understand and love your subject, and to really tailor your application towards that. And I think that involves really immersing yourself in the subject and learning to love it. And sometimes it does require a bit of effort, before you've understood something and really do learn to love it. And that, I think, really comes from immersing yourself in the current affairs, in the very basic parts of substantive criminal law in our case, and procedural law, the professional ethics. And I think just reading anything and everything on the subject that comes your way. Another good resource, I think, that many will know as well from the Inner Temple is the Inner Temple Current Affairs email that comes around every day, which is a bespoke legal current affairs email list. That is incredibly useful, I think, as well, to start understanding what questions might come up. A lot of it as well came from actually applying and in many cases being unsuccessful and learning from the experience that way. Speaking to people through your law school as well, trying to get information from them was incredibly useful. I think peer support, we've touched upon the collegiate character of the bar. I think that is also reflected very much among peers at law school as well. So that was incredibly useful. And also the resources that the law schools and the IN provide, such as the mock interview process, the one-to-ones with mentors both in the IN and law school were all very useful. So there is a lot of material out there already, but that was how I prepared, really. I think in essence it was just mastering the basics of the subject that I was interested in or the practice area that I was interested in, and just immersing myself in that fully, whether that was through conversations with Ollie or others, or in my own time just reading what the current affairs and the latest developments in law and practice were.
You clearly took the initiative and did the research yourself, did the work yourself, and I imagine that takes a lot of resilience, a lot of patience, a lot of hard work. And you also spoke about learning from previous applications, and we've all applied for things which we haven't been successful in, and it can be a really disheartening experience. But how did you turn that into a positive and continue all of the hard work which you clearly did and which eventually paid off?
I think ultimately it's about motivation. In order to motivate yourself to do the hard work that is inevitably required, you have to have a very strong vision of yourself in doing this vocation. And it is a vocation. You have to really want to do it. You have to really love it. I was fortunate enough to know the bar quite well through my experiences through the IN and my bar course, but also through working at the bar's pro bono charity, Advocate. I work with barristers day in, day out. I probably work with barristers more than barristers do themselves, I'd like to think. Certainly a great spectrum of barristers across different areas of law. And I think that really affirmed my desire to go to the bar ultimately, and that it was worth putting the hours in. So I think it's ultimately, you just have to ask yourself your question, can you imagine yourself there? From what you know, would you enjoy doing it? And if the answer to that question is yes, I want to do this, then you just have to keep going. The resilience that's required is not easy. It's difficult. It's always difficult getting rejected. It's always difficult reading painful feedback. But I think where you have to go through a pain barrier ultimately to learn, and that requires allowing yourself to be humbled by the feedback that you get, and actually thinking in a quite clinically, I suppose, about where you can really improve, and then you just have to do it and really focus on really where you need to improve, whether that's advocacy, whether that's understanding current affairs better, and the for and against arguments that you need to develop. I think, yes, it's ultimately that last 10% really of success, in my experience, is the most painful one, and that's where you really have to do a lot of self-examination. Ollie and I often would discuss notes I'd made on interviews I'd had and where I could have improved. And that was actually quite a useful learning tool as well that I would recommend listeners doing, is actually keeping a good note of what was asked in an interview, what you think could have been better, and what you think you did well, and then going over that and discussing it with maybe somebody through the IN or somebody from law school, etc. But I think that was probably, in the last couple of times applying, was the most useful thing to do, actually, to have a good comprehensive note of what you've done already and improving upon that note and practicing it as well with somebody that actually knows more than you, which of course with Ollie is I have somebody to do that with.
And can I just say, actually, that's a very important point that Marcus just raised. And I know from a mentor's perspective, sometimes very difficult to share the pain that your mentee is feeling, albeit that I'm not, as it were, the recipient of the negative feedback. But what Marcus did, which I would commend to anybody, is to take from the interview process as much positivity as he could do. And that involved him putting together a very structured and very detailed self-reflection of what he did well, what he did badly, what feedback he was given, what kinds of questions he was asked, whether he felt he'd researched or was knowledgeable on those topics, or whether he needs to read more around those particular areas. And that level of self-examination, which is painful and takes time, is exactly what is needed to polish and learn and improve. And over the 2 years that Marcus and I have been working together, it's been evident that that self-reflection has been fundamental in terms of him becoming the number one candidate for the chambers that offered him pupillage. It's a very difficult thing to do. Nobody likes to expose their own weaknesses. Nobody likes to reflect upon where they've gone wrong. Nobody likes to admit defeat, but it's critical because at the bar, you can't win every case. And the only way you bounce back and the only way you deliver a better performance and a better outcome for your client or for the CPS is to accept where you went wrong, reflect upon it and improve upon it. That's why the bar is such a unique profession, because you are on your own, you're in court, you're the master of your own advocacy, and at times you will know because either the judge tells you or the jury tell you that you've gone wrong, and you have to be able to assess why that was and build upon it. People who don't take criticism easily should look elsewhere, because the bar on a daily basis asks you to critique your own performance and understand what your failings are. And it takes real strength of character to work with that. And what I saw in Marcus over the last 2 years was a real development in his ability to assess where he'd done well and, more importantly, where he'd gone wrong and to improve upon it. So the interview process, the striving for pupillage is often about falling and picking yourself up. Not many people will get pupillage at the first time of asking. And the ones who end up with pupillage are the people who routinely pick themselves up, evaluate where they went wrong, and improve upon that the next time.
Just to piggyback on that, if I may, Ollie, I think there's something to be said as well in the process of producing one of these reflective notes as well that is useful. When you come back to it again, you can fill in the blanks often of where you might have answered questions not so well. You can look up things, etc. It is the process of producing one of those notes as part of the self-examination that is just as valuable as the self-examination itself, in my view. And also it's a useful note to go back to if you're invited to a second round interview, for example, to think, what have you been asked before? And often the questions that you're asked will be the same across different chambers. And if you've got a well-prepared note already, that just the process itself does help you understand the issues better. It does help you to understand the finer points of a debate, of a development in the law, etc.
I think this focus on self-reflection is extremely useful to applicants. I think when perhaps an interview or, as you said, in your career, a case goes slightly wrong, it can be very tempting, I'm sure, to just ignore it and to try to forget about it, when actually these can be the times where it's most important to really reflect and to learn from that. Oliver, do you think that it's perhaps easier to do that with somebody else looking at your work? So, for example, a mentor, because sometimes it can be quite difficult, can't it, to really reflect on your own experience?
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to have the strength of character to go through the process yourself. But looking at it from the outside as Marcus's mentor, I found those documents, those self-reflective critiques of his interviews, incredibly valuable, because it gave me a framework as well to work out where I could best help him. And what was routinely emerging was elements of how he delivered in advocacy and how his personality did or didn't come across. From a mentor's point of view, that was my guide as to how best to spend my time with Markus and how to improve those particular areas. And it led us, I think, into, through using Zoom and other similar platforms, some really good sort of mock advocacy scenarios where I could actually see him and hear him and act as a difficult and tempestuous judge from time to time and put him under the thumb and see how he reacted to being interrupted and asked some very probing and difficult questions. And it was through that process that I'd like to think his confidence grew, but equally he started to appreciate what good advocacy is all about and what a good barrister delivers on a daily basis. And it's actually the point that Markus made at the very beginning of his introduction, which is that he wanted to work with people. And lawyers are often seen as being, in some respects, robotic. The law is a series of rules and regulations, and we trot them out and we apply them. But actually, day to day, what we're doing is we're representing people who are, for good reasons or bad, at a very, very low point in their life with a lot to lose, liberty and other things besides. And the skill of a good advocate is to get the law right and to hit the right tones in terms of what the law should or should not say or how it should be applied, but more importantly, to sell the client's story, to create empathy with your tribunal. And it was through the feedback that Markus got, his self-reflection, and then he and I sitting down and going through it, that we worked out that really what we needed to do was add a bit more sort of humanity in a way to his delivery. His deliveries were very good, they were very accurate in the law, but what he needed to do a bit more was to develop his client's story and to be able to sell that and options for the court, so that rather than saying, well, your client must go to prison, they were prepared in a advocacy scenario to consider other options, suspended sentences and what have you. And that's the gift of a real advocate, is to show insight into their client and their predicament, and to then reflect that in the delivery to the court, so the court gets it as well. And in my experience, people who have the ability to communicate with others of all walks of life, who are socially able, i.e. put them in a room with a load of strangers and they will strike up a conversation, those are the kinds of characters that will prosper at the bar. And it's not to say that you can't develop those skills, far from it, but there are certain things that you can do to help you along the way, and it can be as simple as just being more sociable. I joined the Drama Society when I was doing my undergraduate law degree and trod the boards. I was lucky enough to perform up at the Edinburgh Festival, and that taught me about delivery, but it taught me about playing to an audience, which is what barristers do. You know, if I can convince 1,000 strangers at the Edinburgh Fringe that my character is believable through my tone and through my delivery, then I can convince a judge that my client shouldn't go to prison. And it's that kind of level of communication. It's about a story, it's about connection, it's about empathy, simply, it's about insight and understanding. And these are human skills, these aren't lawyer skills, these are things that everyone has. And I think that having a mentor just allows you to become less of a robot, less of a law student, and more of a human being. And certainly, not that Markus is a robot at all, but that was my experience of mentoring him, that as we moved, certainly through the last 6 months, he really started to perform in a way that was more human-driven and less legal-driven. And that I think, it's something that isn't necessarily taught at university or law school. You know, you're told you must pass your degree, you must do this, you must know the law. Nobody sits you down and says you have to be able to communicate with people, you have to be able to win them over and gain their trust. And that, I think, is something that you can't learn from a textbook. You can't learn necessarily in a stale classroom environment. You need somebody where you have a relationship of trust, which I think Markus and I developed, and where he was in a safe place to practice his advocacy and know that if I was giving him negative feedback, it wasn't because I didn't appreciate what he told me or said to me or how he delivered his advocacy, but it was because I cared and I wanted him to do better. And that's, I think, the strength of the mentoring relationship, is that you have that level of trust, that you can be more yourself and less of a student, as it were. Human beings are what makes the criminal justice system tick, and the more we are human, the better we all are.
And on that point, Ollie, one thing that helped me enormously actually at Gray's Inn was participating in the Vocalise programme, which is the Gray's Inn prison debating initiative. And that was incredibly useful, not only for developing real life advocacy skills through debating competitively with other law students. In the second term, I actually got to teach debating to prisoners in prisons themselves. And that was something that developed my confidence, my ability to make up points quite quickly, to think on my feet, and to meet other barristers or aspiring barristers as well. So that was an incredibly valuable experience. Unfortunately, unlike Ollie, my speaking roles in the Theatre Society were non-speaking roles. I wasn't as gifted potentially as gifted a thespian perhaps, but that was for me an incredibly valuable experience that Gray's offered, an incredibly fun one as well. To date was one of the best things I did at law school.
I can definitely vouch for the Vocalise programme. I also taught Vocalise, and it really teaches you, doesn't it, to think on your feet, because you're in a situation, you go in there with this really detailed plan and you think, yep, great, we're going to do this, this and this. And then you get there and you realise your class are completely different to who they were last week, or you realise what you planned wasn't actually going to be that interesting. And we actually ended up doing a debate on Love Island, which was completely off the cuff. It turns out that they all watched Love Island at 9 p.m. in this particular prison, and it was great. And I think that links really nicely, what you've both been saying, to what Markus said at the beginning about how different experiences, which aren't necessarily related to the bar, can be really valuable. I think, Markus, you said that you were making cocktails and doing other much more legally related things. But I think that really demonstrates the importance of soft skills, as you were just talking about, Oliver.
Yeah. It's a important aspect of what barristers do, and it's overlooked. If you've got to sit a client down and tell them that best case they're going to prison for 10 years, you're going to have some very good soft skills, because that is a difficult message to pass. And more importantly, when your client then tells you all about the children who are going to be taken into care and the mortgage that will be defaulted on and the wife will be homeless and such like, it's a very difficult space to be in. And having empathy and having an ability to reassure in the face of the most devastating news is something that you can only learn with time. And again, that's part and parcel of the journey that we're all on, and mentoring is in Marcus's case, and in my case, it's part of the journey. The thing I love about mentoring is I learn through this process. I'm not doing this simply to better other people's existence, although it gives me a great amount of satisfaction that I'm able to do so. But I learn when I explain to somebody like Markus a different approach that they might take, and explain why that might be the better approach. In order to do that, I've got to have put the pieces together and been able to recognise why that's the better approach. And to have that own reflection is improving my advocacy. I'm not sure if I ever told Markus, but the few times that I was in court the day after he and I had done an advocacy session, I often felt that it was some of my best advocacy, because in sitting down with Markus and going through a process, it reminded me of the important elements of any good speech or any good plea and mitigation. And we become complacent. And having somebody you can share your knowledge with allows you to revisit everything that you know is right and proper, and it removes from you the bad habits you've fallen into, because nobody wants to teach other people bad habits. So you revisit what's good, and it's a brilliant process. I would heartily recommend mentoring to anyone, because it makes you, I think, a better advocate. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said years ago, if you can explain a concept to somebody else, then you have to have meticulously understood the concept, because you won't convey the message or the point or the concept unless you have a real understanding of it. And so by mentoring somebody else, you actually have to revisit what it is that you're trying to teach. And so everyone actually benefits.
Yeah, I'd echo that completely. But from my perspective, actually listening to Ollie speak about the problem questions that I had grappled with myself, but also to see him perform his own advocacy based on the same facts was incredibly useful. So I learned a lot from just listening to him. And I think a lot of my learning in that process was subconscious. I had absorbed a lot of his approach to certain facts. I had absorbed turns of phrases that he used that I liked, and these kinds of things. So there is definitely something to be said from a mentee's perspective of just listening, taking notes and absorbing it. And sometimes the answer or the right thing to say just comes to you automatically based on, several conversations, or sometimes something you've read as well. So it's important to certainly complement the mentorship with reading widely and listening to things, but certainly listening to Ollie was really valuable for me, subconsciously and consciously.
And this demonstrates as well the importance of self-reflection, because it isn't just helping with your pupillage interviews, it's going to really help in pupillage. And Oliver, it's helped you in practice as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Before we end the podcast today, are there any final words that you'd like to give people who will be applying for pupillage in the next round? Perhaps it'll be their first time, perhaps it will be their fifth time. Is there anything that you would like to say to them?
I think, as I've said, mastering the basics of your subject is really important. It will give you a lot of confidence as well. As Ollie said, you really need to understand the basic concepts. And unfortunately, the standard required to get pupillage is quite high now. So you almost have to be an almost finished product before even getting in, unfair as that is, perhaps. So mastering the basics and loving the basics of your area of law is really important. We've talked at length already about the importance of self-reflection and making reflective notes on your interviews, because they're incredibly useful in terms of the process of creating them, but also they're good to jog your memory when you come to prepare for other interviews. We haven't really talked too much about paper applications. Ollie was kind enough also to look at some of my paper applications as well, although it's fair to say that most of what we did was oral advocacy practice. But I think one of the most useful things I learned in terms of drafting my many pupillage applications was adopting what they call the STAR structure, which is situation, task, action, result, and in particular focusing on the result of anything you've ever done and showing the learning or the thing that you have enjoyed about an experience is incredibly important, and really adding colour to your paper application so that it stands out by focusing on the examples and describing them in a way that is engaging. So that would be my practical advice. But beyond that, I think, as I said, if you have a vision of yourself doing this job, you really just have to never give up. You just have to keep going. You owe it to yourself to keep going until the door is shut, as painful as that is. And it has been painful for me, but you just have to keep on going if you love this and if you love the idea of it. And that would be my advice.
Oliver, are there any final words you'd like to give the listeners?
Don't forget you're a human being. Be prepared to cry, be prepared to laugh, but more importantly, be prepared to work hard, because that's what it takes. Nobody is necessarily going to be handed a pupillage on a plate. The kind of strength of character that you need to do this job day in, day out is born out of the process that you have to go through to get this job. The irony is that in my day it was called the Bar Vocational Course. And the nature of a vocation is that you basically just turned up and somebody gave you the role. Of course, in reality, that's not right. This is a incredibly difficult profession to get into. It's the most wonderfully rewarding profession in many different guises, but it's going to require a lot of soul searching. And I would simply say to people, just don't give up. You'll know if it's for you because you'll have come far enough. Your appetite and interest will be very much in place, but you've just got to show resilience, and you've got to show learning, and you've got to show humanity, and put those things together. And as Markus has proved, you will get there.
Markus and Oliver, thank you so much for joining us. You've given us loads of useful insight, which I'm sure many applicants will benefit from. And it's been so great to hear about your mentoring relationship and how beneficial that's been for both of you. And again, Markus, congratulations on pupillage.
Thank you so much.
You thoroughly deserve it, and very well done. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Alana.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Raising the Bar podcast. Please subscribe, rate and review. And for more information, check us out on Twitter @RaisingTheBarGI.